Test, test. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We want to thank you for coming to our session, Teaching African American History in High School as Resistance, the State of the Field 2000 to 2023. I'm your moderator, Daaiyah, and I'll introduce myself before we get into the presenters. As I stated, my name is Daaiyah. I'm from Mississippi, Columbus, Mississippi, to be exact. I taught for over 10 years. I did 6 years in the secondary classroom and 4 years post-secondary. And currently I am a public servant for the state of Mississippi. And if you have any more questions about the public servant aspect, I'll let you know about that in private. So we'll start off with Dr. Fernandez.
Thank you for the upgrade. I'm Roberto Fernandez. I use the he, they series of pronouns. I'm a Broward County social studies teacher, and I'm also an instructional facilitator with the school district's Department of Equity, Diversity, and School Climate. And I'm happy to be here. Doc.
My name is Monica Tetzlaff, and I'm a professor of history at Indiana University, South Bend. I'm an interloper here in the panel because I was going to teach African American history in high school. We do teach some of the advanced classes sometimes, but the funding fell through, and I hope that that will happen in the future. The other thing I just wanted to say about myself is that I was one of the founders of the Civil Rights Heritage Center, and I might be able to speak a little bit about how cultural institutions in the community, especially African American history museums, can help with the teaching of high school African American studies.
Thank you. And my name is Henry Sandoval. I'm the Director of Business Development for Black History 365. We are a K-12 educational entity that has produced some wonderful work that is being used in close to 300 school districts across the United States. And so I look forward to visiting with this panel up here and learning a little bit more and sharing as well.
Thank you. I am Jonnie Mae Perry. I am from Indian River County, the Gifford community. I am CEO, Executive Director of the Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center. In 2018, the Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center opened in a little historic church called the Old Macedonia Colored Church. This particular building was going to be torn down by the county, and it was renovated and preserved and now serves as the Museum Cultural Center. We are in the process of developing and expanding the Cultural Center, and it will include teaching Black history to our community and our students. So I'm excited about getting resources and learning from this panel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, presenters. So since our session is about teaching African American history in high school, when I taught African American history as a teacher, the most students I had was 6 students. So I just wanted to get a gauge from you guys. What is the relationship with students now? Are they interested in African American history in your specific locales?
So I am in Broward County, Florida, which is near the major metropolis is Fort Lauderdale. And for myself, when I first started teaching at Boyd H. Anderson High School, we had a lot of interest among the students for a Black history program. And so I want to say around 2009, the kids approached me and said, hey, would you teach the African American history course? And we want to like go ahead and lobby for this. And so we ended up teaching at the 2009-2010 school year. When I changed schools in 2015 to Plantation High School, it was one of those similar approaches where they're like, hey, we've got a lot of kids that are interested in taking African American history. Would you mind teaching the course? And I said, absolutely not. I would love to teach the course. So I taught it. So in Broward County Public Schools, there is a lot of interest among the students and among the families in the community for the education of students in regards to African American history. I would like to expand on that a little bit as well, to share that from 2016 through February 2020, I engage students in service learning projects at a historic African-American cemetery in Fort Lauderdale called North Woodlawn Cemetery, where I took approximately 100 to 200 students across the course of a week in January to do service learning projects at a historic Black cemetery. And not just like cleaning headstones, but then also like, here's why this place matters. Here's some of the stories of our community. And the kids were really, really invested in that. And I remember, one day I was like really frustrated and my principal told me some stuff and I was like, I'm not going to do my project ever again. And as soon as like, are we doing the cemetery project again this year? And I'm just like, yes. And so there is, at least in Broward County schools, there is an interest in learning African-American history among the students.
Well, I've been teaching since 1994, so it's waxed and waned is what I've seen. I'm in a majority white university, so it's a little bit different than in high school, but I've always had a pretty steady amount of about 20 students at least once a year who will sign up. And then I went through a time period about 2015 when I returned from Ghana, and it seemed like the world had changed. I had all this exciting stuff to share, but my class got canceled because there weren't enough students signing up. So I worked hard to build that up again. I had been gone, and I recruit from my regular American history class. Usually people will get to know me and then might take an upper level. So the last time I taught African American history was, again, at that level, around 20 for 2 semesters, because students wanted to know the other half, and it is a 300 level course. I think we have a little more interest at the 100 level because 300 sounds daunting to a lot of students. And I was going to teach the 100 level to the high school students. And I guess about 4 signed up at this private high school that the alumni were really excited, and the 4 students were excited, but the school said that's not enough for us to justify the expense. And the university didn't really work with me either. To make it any cheaper for them, or because they weren't using the facilities or anything like that. But, facilities, I don't want to get into too many details, but they're all trying to go online with us right now. So they don't care about the facilities. So I think the interest is still there, but there's also, a lot of fear about talking about race.
So to answer that question, I'm going to answer it from a little different perspective, and that is from a company providing textbooks and seeing the excitement from students. And I can say absolutely, students are excited about this, learning about African American history when they know about it, when they know that it's in their school or they're aware that they can take the class. And that's something we're seeing the most challenges with, is the students knowing that they can take this class. And I'm from Texas. I'm from Dallas, Texas. And in Texas, they have mandated where African American studies is to be provided to students as an elective. And to give you an example, Amarillo, Texas, similar to over here, what they were stating is only 6 students initially signed up for an African American studies class. Then after a year of using a curriculum and having the training, the teachers having the training, the students were so excited, they came back and now they have 100 additional students enrolled in that class. And so having it provided, having that excitement around it, and then the teachers having the support and training is what's going to make a difference for the student experience. And so one other example I would like to provide is the commitment from Katy, Texas. Katy, Texas is near Houston, and they're a predominantly white district in Texas, and they have gone all in to support their students in high school. And they purchased, not necessarily purchased, they purchased for all of their high school students to have access to Black history. And so seeing a district jump out there like that and support their students, they're not only using it in an African American studies class, they're also infusing it into some of their core subjects or even their arts class as well. So there's various ways that it can be used, but we are seeing an increase in student interest after they know that it's available to them.
Thank you. My perspective is somewhat different also. My mind goes back to, I was volunteering at one of the local schools, and it was in February at the time. And I remember saying, "Oh wow, I'm excited. What month is this? You know, what is this the first day of?" And nobody could tell me, and it was very disheartening. And I realized that Black history was not being taught in the schools in Indian River County. Later, I found out that one of our high schools did have it as an AP course, an elective. And I can't say to this moment if that's still happening due to the restrictions that the governor has mandated for the state of Florida in education. I will say, with the Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center, for the last couple of years, we have partnered with the Indian River County School District. And some of the schools, middle school and some high school students have visited the museum during Black History Month. And it was very heartwarming to see that they did seem to have an interest in Black history. And we always give them something to take with them so they can continue to read and to learn. So that spark is there. And I think if we have the ability to share and give them this information, that we'll see more of an interest in Black history.
Thank you, guys. As you guys were sharing, I took some notes and I heard partnerships, building relationships with the community, having support from other districts, service learning projects. So as you guys were talking, if you look over the course of African American history, religion has always been a big part of the Black experience, and especially in Christianity. But lately, it seems that perhaps religion has separated from the Black experience. So do you think that has had any effect in African American history in the high school, whether it's Christianity or Islam within the Black experience?
So in my experience, I've never, all right, let me try this again. So I'm a Roman Catholic Christian. So for me, I've always approached, any conversations about religion from what I was raised in, which is Roman Catholicism. When it comes to teaching Black history, I've talked a lot about the power of the Black church in community activism, in engaging in, like the Black ministers had the power because they didn't rely on anyone else's money. They basically worked off of tithes and the support of the community, where they were the big community leaders and could push, they could push the truth to power more than anyone else in the community. So I talked about those aspects of religion, for the sake of, again, truth. I was one of the people that was involved in the writing of the new Florida Black History Standards. And one of the things that I did with intention with the high school standards was I included 3 slave narratives. I included the one of Obluda Equiano, very well known by many people. I included Omar ibn Said, who was another African scholar who was enslaved and brought to the United States, and he wrote his narrative in Arabic. And then I also included the story of Kazula by Zora Neale Hurston, which is known as Barracoon. So I wanted students in Florida to, be exposed to a variety of perspectives. And for me, the story of Omar ibn Said is one where it demonstrates through a primary source document that this man was very well educated. And when he wrote his story, he wrote it in the language that he knew, which was Arabic. And so the version of the text that I use with students is the one where it has the mirror text. It's got the Arabic on one page and it's got the English transcription on the other. And because I want students to see that, at least from my perspective as one of the contributors, Africans had knowledge. They didn't come here because of anything except greed and because of a need for enslaved labor. And so that's one of those things that I deliberately thought about including his story, because his was a diverse religious perspective from the ones that we usually see, which is a, Judeo-Christian perspective and really a Christian perspective.
Again, I'm going to approach this from the another angle. I didn't mention that my most exciting class is Freedom Summer, which is a civil rights study tour where students and community members, so college students and community members with a commitment to civil rights, and also sometimes retirees who were part of the civil rights movement, locally or somewhere else in the nation, go on a bus trip together. And we go to Mississippi, Alabama. We go to Georgia and Tennessee. I wish we could go to Florida too, maybe one day. But the churches that we visit are so essential. And I make the same point as you do, that they are bases of power, and they're beautiful structures that we visit, and they're part of the historic tour, the 16th Street Baptist Church, and so many others. And one of the students that I've been involved with, he became a minister. He's Black, and he comes from a long ministerial family. And after taking the Freedom Summer Tour, he organized what is called the Church and the Movement in our town, where he would have different themes, and he would bring different churches together, including Roman Catholic, always the Black church, but then also Latinx churches, predominantly white churches, but really based in the liberation theology of the civil rights movement. So in the community education part, and also in the tour, the church plays a role, very big one.
And so from my perspective, one thing I'd like to add is I think that religion, it goes hand in hand with culture. And so being able to understand the power of that, and having students have the ability and the opportunity to learn that. And so just like in Black History 365, we have an entire chapter that is on the Black church, and we talk about the impact that that's had and the impact on history, and where that has derived and where it has ended up now. And so to make it a short answer, I think that it is very important, and I think that keeping it there for students to understand from a historical standpoint without swaying them left or right from their beliefs is something that's going to be very important.
Thank you. I lived in Atlanta for 40 years, and the Black church played a major part in the history of Black history, as you all know, with Ebenezer Baptist Church and so forth. But I've been in Indian River County now for about 12 years, returning back to where I grew up, and not so much. However, there are a couple of the churches, Christian churches I'm familiar with, that do honor Black History Month and try to share Black history. And the focus is on our local Black history, because Gifford has a very rich history. And I'll just briefly mention the Florida Highwaymen. There are 8 original Florida Highwaymen that painted and that are from Gifford, Florida. But the temple under Rabbi Michael supports and collaborates with the Gifford Historical Museum and try to focus on Black history. And after their religious holiday, we have scheduled time to meet and talk about how we can collaborate with a program that they have with the Holocaust and teach Black history also. So we're very excited about that.
That's awesome. Thank you. So moving the question a little bit to language, right? African American history versus Black history. Have you, in your work, done any kind of cross disciplines collaboration with other ethnic fields such as Latinx, Asian Americans, and Native American studies to create a more comprehensive and inclusive approach to Black history?
So, excuse me. I have not found opportunities for intersection with other communities. So I haven't been able to find like Latinx or really in Broward, it's Seminole or Miccosukee tribe. That's like the native tribe in our community. But one of the things that I did was a service learning project, again, at the Black Cemetery in Fort Lauderdale. And going back to African American versus Black, to your point, Broward County and a lot of South Florida was originally built by immigrants from the Bahamas. So a lot of our pioneers in South Florida are Bahamian. And so when we get into language issues of, Black history versus African American history, it's one of those where, okay, we have the Bahamians, we have, some, there's oral history that I've heard. I've yet to find documentation specific to Woodlawn Cemetery of Puerto Ricans being buried there. So that would be like the Latinx intersection. But the story that I heard from Mickey Hinton, and I want to say his name because he's passed on to glory, but his stories helped inform me as a scholar and as a teacher. But Mickey told me one day, he goes, there are Puerto Ricans buried here. The Puerto Ricans wouldn't be treated, or the babies wouldn't be delivered by the white doctors, because the white doctors wanted the whole pregnancy, the whole term care aspect. And Dr. Sistrunk, who was is considered the first Black doctor in Broward County, he was the only one that would deliver the Puerto Rican babies. And so for me, it was an opportunity, an intersection of, this is my part of my story because I'm Puerto Rican, and that's, so that resonates with me, and I'm desperate to find proof, and I realize that with our communities, documentary proof is not always available, but I'm appreciative of the story, because I'm like, it gives me hope. But for my students throughout, like, the cemetery that I work at is at Fort Lauderdale, but up in Pompano Beach, there's Westview Cemetery, and that's a historic Black cemetery for the city of Pompano Beach, and that's where Esther Roll is buried. She had the character of Florida Evans, and so she is of Bahamian descent, and part of her story is one of Black history and African American history at that intersection of both, because her parents were from the Bahamas, and then going down to Coconut Grove, where we have a large Black Bahamian community, and again the intersection of Black history and African American history. So personally, I like to use the cemeteries as a springboard for having these kind of conversations, because I think that, one, in many cases, the cemeteries are, the only monument for some individuals within our communities for their story. And has it not, for me, has it not been because of someone's gravestone? There are stories that I wouldn't know, because it affords me the opportunity to request a death certificate. What can I learn from the last moment of your life that I can use as a stepping stone into the, earlier parts, or at least into our community story? And so that's kind of where my intersection is.
So much to think about here. I want to take this into my teaching of other subjects that are not specifically Black history. I mentioned that I teach U.S. history, and there is a college, I forget what they call it, but the advanced college project in our schools, where they can take history classes a little bit early for the intro level. And my course, this isn't going to be a totally positive story. My course qualifies for diversity in the U.S. at our university. In my visits, which are so brief, they're not like your wonderful training. I couldn't really make a dent in what kind of history was being taught beyond the standard American history in the high schools. And I stopped working with that program. But it still counts for diversity in the US, which is our requirement. when they come to us, which is disappointing to me, but I take it very seriously. My diversity in the US class is multicultural. And that includes, a healthy dose of the Black movements for equality from the time when slavery ended, which is usually the half I teach. And I also, and then all the way up to the present. And I continue to have to learn. And there are intersections, of course, between Black and Latinx cultures and how they come together. Florida has given me the best opportunity and that's why I went on the tour of Fort Mose, which was incredible, because of the Black Catholics and its Spanish history, and it challenges students to go back a little further than the Pilgrims and 1619 and Jamestown, to look at a broader view of American history. And the indigenous is very, very important there. And I love the Seminole story, which incorporates fugitives from slavery, freedom seekers, and indigenous peoples forming one new people.
So when I answer this, you guys are going to think that I paid the moderator, but I promise you I didn't. So we understand at Black History 365 that a very, very, very small percentage of Black history is really in American history. It's all over the world. And so we have now taken it further, and we're creating a Latin history book, and we're going to overlap the Black and Brown, and we're going to highlight the significant impact that African Americans or Africans have had as they were taken to these countries, whether it's South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and we are going to highlight their achievements, and then we're going to highlight that all the way through up into modern day America. And so we plan on going through each country, and we already have. The book will be out later this year, and it's going to be very similar to the Black History book we have, but it's going to overlap and show the intersections there of the influence from the culture standpoint, from arts to food to just anything you can think of. We're going to make sure we highlight that, because we know that there is a very, very strong bond between Black and Brown and between various cultures in that vicinity. And so we want to highlight those. And so, again, it was a great question. I'm very excited to share that it's going to be Latin history that we have coming out. And we are going to share those stories, and they're going to be very, very engaging.
Thank you. That we definitely would love a copy of that book. We have a young lady who's Puerto Rican, Marion, and she's one of our volunteers. And she talked about often the intersection between her culture and our culture. So we're looking forward to going forth and really learning more about all of that. Another intersection is Nelly Santamarina, who is Cuban and owns a raw space art gallery in River County, and we collaborate and work together. We've had one exhibit a couple of years ago called 3 Steps Forward, 2 Steps Back. And it was a social justice exhibition after the death of George Floyd. So we are beginning in that genesis stage of having these relationships and intersections with these other groups, and we'll continue to grow as we build within that culture center.
Awesome. And just a personal story, just growing up in Mississippi, and even as a teacher, I kind of blame myself for not sharing those stories of Afro-Cubans, Afro-Brazilians, So the more I learn, the more I'll give back to the teachers back at home. So that's becoming very important to me. So thank you guys for sharing. And just sticking with this idea of language and, of course, controversy. Are there instances where controversy surrounding the teaching of African American history or Black history have led to a positive change or advancement in educational policies and practices for you? And for you guys, how important is this autonomy for you to survive in this type of political culture today?
Thanks for that question. As I stated earlier, I was one of the members of the work group that wrote the Florida Black History Standards. And I was invited by one of the board members of the African American History Task Force. And, she asked me, partially because of my service learning, my master's degree is in African and African diaspora studies with a specialization in pedagogy. So I think, to some extent, it was one of those, like, he's a done kind of deal because he hits all of the check marks for the system, or correction, for the institution. Because we're not allowed to say systemic racism in Florida. But we could say institutional racism, just to clarify. So to me, the invitation by that board member and the work, I was one of 13. And when I started looking to see where other people were from, I was the only one from South Florida. So I was like, okay, I'm the token Hispanic. I represent a community that is very progressive. And so I looked at this as I have to try to push the envelope as much as I can, because as far as I saw it, we have Republican leadership in the state. And so I want personally to have students exposed to as much truth and historically accurate material as possible. And so everything that informed how I did this work was informed, from a place of love. I'm like, what do I want my own daughters to learn in school? And then as well as, what do I want other Florida students to learn? And so I use this access to power as an opportunity to, let me sneak in the things that I think are important. I lost some battles, namely the battle to start the standards with Africa, because I learned while I was in the military that African American history begins with Africa. And I did a presentation on African American history in Ethiopia, and the students at the university that I was presenting were like, why didn't you start with Africa? Like, African Americans are Africans just like us, and you should start with us because we're part of their story. And from that moment forward, it was something that was very powerful to me, and something that I was like, you know what, I can't make the same mistake again. And so I tried, and unfortunately I failed, as you can see with the standards, that we didn't have Africa started. The consolation, and this is where we can get into how do we teach African and African American history. The consolation was, well, Mr. Fernandez, we're not going to put it in these standards, but African civilizations are taught in the Florida world history standards. And I was like, oh, okay. So I wrote a note down, because they're not lying. That is an accurate statement. I've taught African civilizations with a lot of detail and accuracy in my world history class. So I'm like, okay, I got you. So, so teaching Black history, African American history, African history in Florida, I learned, is going to be one of those where, you know what, I have to find all the loopholes. And teachers are going to have to find all of the loopholes. And so with a lot of, again, the standards that were written, it was, as far as I could, I did it on purpose. I did deliberately try, along with some peers that may or may not have done it with that much intention. But one of the communities that I wanted to try to include, especially I would encourage everyone to review the Florida history standards, the Black history standards, if you haven't done so, because my personal experience is it's been politicized. So, and again, battles that are won and battles that are lost. And it was a consensus, standard process. So, here's what I want, here's what I want. You had 13 people with wants and needs, and then where can we meet in the middle? So it was compromise. Just like the writing of the Constitution, we did have to compromise. And so please review the Florida history, the Black history standards. And if you don't know how to find them, please meet me with me after, and I'll share those with you. I have a link to it. But, I wanted to include as much as possible in plain sight names of individuals who are part of the Black LGBTQ plus community. The only person I could get in was Bayard Rustin, and that's because of his work as a civil rights advocate. So, you know, like, again, one of those where things happened and I wasn't able to do that. But I do believe that, you know, engaging community and trying to fight, again, the fights that we can when we can is part of that effort to really bring this story as truthfully and honestly, and to provide students with an opportunity to, you know, analyze history, to interpret history. One of my professors in college said it's the right and responsibility of every generation to read and interpret history for themselves. And, you know, I took that and I ran with it because I'm in a high school and I'm like, these are the kids that are going to go into our community and it's their responsibility. So they're the ones that are going to take the banner from me. And so that's how I was looking at the work with the standards writing, is like, where can I give them opportunities and give teachers the opportunity to, like, here's some real hard history. And part of that work was also with the thought in the back of my mind of, I'm including these names, but they might be removed. Because again, we recommend, and it goes through the political bureaucratic process for additional check marks. And through the grace of God, everything that we put in was kept. So Anna J. Kingsley is one of those standards. Her story gets to get told to students. That's a powerful story, a Florida story. And now all teachers are exposed to that. You know, the slave narratives that were included are also part of that story. Like, let the kids read the stories and come up with their own analysis. So I don't have to tell you systemic racism. You can figure it out for yourself. And then you go home and you tell your parents, hey, I read this story and here's what I think. And then parents can kind of fill in where me as an educator in the state of Florida, and for you as well, because you're kind of in between us, but to me, the community organizations have the most power right now. Parents have the most power right now. What we're seeing with the Moms for Liberty is a certain demographic of parents that is asserting power. And what we need is the rest of the parents to show up, whether you're an ally of the Black community, whether you're an ally of the LGBTQ community, we all need to show up. You know, I'm a Puerto Rican man, white passing, you know. And so for me, it's like, what can I contribute? Like, I teach as much as I can the truth, and I push the boundaries as much as I can. And as a content expert, I know how far I can walk to that gray line and cross into the gray line before crossing into, I'm going to lose my license as a teacher.
Well, I'm here to stand in solidarity with you and with the other high school teachers, because I know your jobs are not as secure as mine, and I have so much more freedom. And in my experience, professors do not take advantage of the freedom that tenure gives them, the freedom of speech, to get involved, to get the word out past the ivory tower, and to think past your career. My heart has always been, I do love to write and research. I do. And that's why I'm a professor, because I do that and I love to teach. I actually love it more than writing and research, because you reach people and you can change lives. So as much as I can, I want to stand in solidarity with you all. We used to have programs that I was a part of where we drew high school students in the summer. Again, the excuse that's always given is money. Well, we don't make any money off them because they're not actually paying a tuition class. Well, my thing was like, we're recruiting them. Oh, they go on to other better colleges after they take your program. They don't want to stay here, so it's not worth it for us. But we just got to keep trying to find new ways. And the museum way has been helpful. When you talk about controversy, I wish I could say I have a positive story coming out of it. It's sad because it shuts people down. This word systemic, now nobody tells me what words to use in my classroom, but I have used the word systemic racism, especially after George Floyd was killed and everybody was talking about it and students had questions. And I try to explain, I don't need to tell y'all here, but, individual acts of hatred are so different from a system that privileges some and disadvantages others. And we can look at the exact way it does that. It's not because of evil people constantly in a conspiracy. It's because people don't stop the racist systems from the past when the civil rights movement happens. And we look at housing, and very specifically redlining, and in our town, looking at the deeds, looking at what happened with specific neighborhoods. So that's the systemic thing I teach. And I don't care what I call it. I mean, I will call it institutional. But what I've heard from some of my colleagues is, well, I was advising this history major and he will never take a class from you because you talk about systemic racism. And he doesn't believe in that, like it's a kind of a faith statement of a very secular kind, I'm afraid, and not a religious kind, because that is not faith-based. So I think the controversy, the pain of George Floyd's killing brought people to my classes. I'm really sad to say that it took that, but young people do care, and they haven't stopped coming. Some of them have, and those who are very politically conservative and who I think listen to, certain news media, or parents that see systemic racism as the enemy. But the students are still coming, and that's positive. And we just, I want to be in solidarity with you who don't have as much power, and to speak up and amplify your voices if you need, or sneak me the stuff I need to say, and I'll say it.
And from my perspective, I would add that maybe not positive, but there's some hope out of it. There's some hope out of these challenges, because what we're seeing is a generation that's coming after us that is more aware than ever before, and they're wanting to learn, and they are working to find ways to learn. And so I use my son as an example. I have a 21-year-old son, and in high school, I don't remember talking about cultural history. I don't remember talking about Black history. I don't remember learning about that. But he comes home and he would talk about it, or they would talk about it. They may not be learning about it, but they're talking about it. And so that means that the next step, they're going to figure out ways to learn about it or to teach it. Another area that I see that really it brings hope is the amount of, whether it's after school activity groups, Saturday schools, or the freedom schools, or boys and girls clubs, or just like the historical museum, what you all are doing. You're seeing more and more of that pop up. People are taking ownership of teaching their history, and that has never happened before. And so now you're really seeing individuals come together, in this case for Black history, but there are other cultures where they are coming together. And then you're seeing those groups start coming together. And so there's strength in numbers, and we're starting to see that slowly. I think all of this, from my personal view, is this is a generational change. It's going to take time, and we are at the very beginning of this change. But having individuals here that are on the committee of creating standards and seeing the vision of what he understands and what's important to him, that gives me hope. So that gives the students hope. And so I'm very hopeful to know that, change, whether it's with a textbook or a classroom teacher or an event just like this, there's going to be change. And we're headed in a very positive direction with that in this group.
Thank you. Yes, I feel for the Gifford community, we have a unique opportunity. We support the Indian River County School District, and many of my colleagues go out to the school board meetings and just take a stand, whether they say something or not. And for the Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center, last month, we were privileged with a 2-page spread in the newspaper called the 32963. And the 32963 is what we call, and it is the Beach newspaper, and it's very hard to get in it. And they did a 2-page spread on the Gifford Historical Museum and Cultural Center. So that put us out there even more. And we were very privileged to have that spread. And I got asked, well, how did you all do that? How did you accomplish that? Said that to say people are listening and they are paying attention. And I had one supporter that said, with everything going on in Tallahassee, I think this is going to help your cause. It's going to help get your information out there, your mission, and what you all are trying to accomplish. So we're very pleased about that. I will just close with this statement. We are a member of the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network. And that's a network of over 40 Black history, African American museums and cultural centers throughout the state of Florida, started by Miss Artemis Barnes. And we collaborate, we network, and that Black history is being taught all over the state of Florida. And we definitely want others to support those museums and cultural centers as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And before we get to our next question, I just hope everybody is listening. We need you. We need your support. Teachers need your support in Texas and Florida and Mississippi. Lord knows. I'm praying I'll have a job when I get back. But we need your support. We need your support. We need your voices as parents, the students, especially the parents and students. If you guys lead the way, you know, there's no stopping us because we need this in our states. Our students, our babies need this. All right. So with the next question, I heard a lot of collaborations, community, civic engagement. Have you guys seen any successful models of teacher workshops or intergenerational collaboration that have helped sustain African American history in schools or in the community or in different organizations?
So I guess immediately when you were asking the question, the first thing that came to my mind is a nonprofit called the Archaeology in the Community organization. They're out of Washington, D.C. The director and, an owner of that nonprofit is Dr. Jones, which I thought was kind of ironic considering, connections to Indiana Jones, but she is a African-American archaeologist who does work in the Caribbean with the African diaspora. And so I registered to attend a week of doing archaeology at James Madison's Montpelier in Virginia. And I just did that at the end of this July. And so for me, one, between the opportunity to do actual archaeology at, a site of violence because it was a slave plantation, to be working specifically in the overseer's site to learn about the nuances of some of the overseers at James Madison's Montpelier were African American overseers, to learn how the Madisons raped their enslaved women and had children with them, and how there's a whole descendant community that are heirs of James Madison, President of the United States, was a powerful opportunity for learning. To read the story of, I can't remember his name because I need it right now, but I believe it's Paul Jennings, who was an enslaved person for the Madisons, and he was enslaved to Dolly Madison and was at the White House when the British burned the White House, And he is one of the people that actually literally took the painting of George Washington down, rolled it up, and took it in a cart with him away because Dolly Madison said, oh, don't forget to take the George Washington painting. And yet the story that we're told is that Dolly Madison saved the George Washington painting when in actuality she was fleeing for her own safety and left the enslaved people in the White House to take care of that work. And so reading that story on the balcony of Montpelier, knowing that this man worked here, was enslaved here, and probably sat on some of these steps, maybe, one could hope, but hearing these powerful stories, and I'm like, wow, like to me, that was an opportunity that I needed, especially because on July 19th, that's when the State Board of Education approved the Black History Standards, and that's when a lot of the conversation nationally came about. And that's when part of those national conversations and local conversations about the white racist that were on that, the work group. And I was just like, did I do something wrong? Where I was questioning my own pedagogy, my own philosophy, my own integrity. I'm like, did I do something wrong? So I needed that space. And so I'm like, you know what? I worked within the system and the access to power that I had. And so I did, I did the best that I could. But I do think that community, and again, local organizations, I explicitly included historical societies, historic sites, and cemeteries in the high school Black History Standards. Because that way, again, we get the kids out to these sites. People can tell the stories that the teachers can't. It just takes the courage to take the field trip. So I think that the community is going to be a big part moving forward. And speaking of community, the freedom schools were started in the 60s, and I want to make sure that we don't forget that, history, Black history has been taught for a long time. And then even before the 60s, we have the oral tradition that many Black families kept. And to me, my first introduction to the family aspect of oral tradition is from Alex Haley's Roots. But then in learning about the Madisons and how the Madison enslaved community and the descendants maintained their stories in that same griot tradition as West Africa. And they maintained the stories, and then they had the stories, and then they verified with documents. So we need these stories. We need the community, especially in the states that are currently under attack with how we teach Black history.
Yeah, I think the cultural centers are a great place to bring the generations together, and field trips. I just want to second that. There's nothing like learning from the people who experience the history, and bringing the elders who have maybe a little time, and kids who are hopefully eager to learn, or we're gonna put it in front of them. And it is so different than being in the classroom reading your book, or even watching a video. This person lived it. That is so powerful. And that's what we do through the Civil Rights Heritage Center. And sometimes we've been able to go to high schools, and sometimes, more often than not, we want to make sure our school district has the funding for buses to take kids on field trips, because again, that can be the place that these things stop, because somebody doesn't spend the money and takes the money from the public schools. So and then maybe we have to carpool. I don't know. I'm not giving up. But we can't be grant writing all the time either. So those are some of the challenges, but it's so worth it. And just inviting one speaker to a class, or bringing a class to a little bit of a panel or a forum where they can ask questions. And sometimes we share meals together too, if we have that budget. That can also be really powerful, just those informal conversations between elders and young people.
Great, thank you. And hopefully I fully understood the question, but some practices with trainings. One thing that, you could have the best resource in a classroom, but the most important aspect is the teacher and their not only willingness, but the ability to teach the material. And so At Black History 365, one thing that we do is we make sure that the teachers are equipped with all the tools necessary to inspire and create a classroom experience that is unmatched. And it starts with training them on implicit bias and understanding the importance of making everybody in the classroom feel heard and feel welcomed. And then we move on to helping them set up that classroom, and then working into the book as to what is the most important aspect of this and how can we tie it to what you're trying to convey to your students. And then once the training has taken place, we don't just leave them there and say good luck. We then become your coach. So you move and transition from being a trainer to a coach, and we support the teachers in the classroom throughout the entire school year. And that means if they have questions that come up and say they're trying to write out a lesson plan and they're unable to find where they can match it maybe to the standard, to where it is in the resource, their trainer/coach is there to help them, and they can help them create that. Or maybe a question comes up in the classroom, and nowadays we know that all of our students have smartphones, tablets, they're recording. It can be very challenging to be a teacher in the classroom. And so you can take a question and you can put it in the parking lot, go back and talk to your coach, and then you can come back and answer it competently the next day to make sure that your students are given the right answer. And so having that support is going to make all the difference in the world. And we have seen the impact already that it's had on some very significant districts here across the United States.
Thank you. At the Gifford Cultural Center, we work with the various generations in terms of Black history through culture. We have activities on site. We have a large circle, and we invite the community, and we always make sure we include our young people. There's another organization in Gifford called the Gifford Youth Achievement Center, and it's an after-school program with elementary through high school. So we do partner with them and get the young people involved. One of the facets of our mission is music, art, and film. And just being here and participating in this conference, we realize that that's definitely one way we can teach Black history and make it fun for the young people, get their attention. Once you have their attention, I think the rest will come, right? So that is definitely something that will play a major part in what we do, teaching also through music, art, and film.
So thank you guys. I want to ask this last question before I open it up to the audience. So looking at the historical context of African-American history as an act of resistance, and for me personally, it just feels that way because Black folks are not seen as Americans or humans. So it always feels like we're fighting, and it always feels like it's resistance. So how can we ensure the sustainability of this field as a mainstay in this country?
I think to some extent maintaining and teaching African-American history in an ideal situation would be the eventual, like just acknowledging that it is American history and full equity with the teaching of American history means teaching about the African-American experience, teaching about the bombing of Puerto Rico by the American Army, teaching about, all of the, the Nisei, the Japanese American that were in concentration camps in the United States, and the extent to which people of Japanese descent throughout the Americas were put into concentration camps, not just from the United States, but even as far as South America, Peru. Like they pulled Japanese descent people from those communities and interred them in these concentration camps in our country. So, and I'm just highlighting a few, but I think we need to get away, like one of the things that always bothered me was when I used to write down Puerto Rican American and I had the hyphen. And then at some point, somebody's like, oh, you're a hyphenated American. And my visceral reaction was to flip a certain hand gesture and tell them to go kick rocks. a lot more graphic and anyways, crass. But I was like, my family has been American since 1918, or actually 1917, when the government graced us with citizenship. And then 2 months later, they graced us with, oh, now we're going to draft you into service for World War I. And so my family, for generations, even after myself, have served in the military. So I'm like, I'm an American. Like, this is my country. And I believe myself to be a patriot. And I say that with some apprehension because patriotism is being blurred with nationalism. And I think a lot of the ugliness that we are seeing in our country is this nasty nationalism. But when I think of patriotism, I think about the members of the various American Legion posts and veterans of foreign war posts that were originally segregated, even though both organizations say they were never segregated. But you have Black posts especially in the South. And so to me, I'm like, when I visit fellow veterans and I'm like, wow, these are Black patriots. Like, these are my kind of people, like, just, they love this country and I love this country, but I want to see better. I expect more from my country, and so I think that's part of like the work. Like, we need to explicitly teach right now. And now more so than ever, yes, we need to teach Black history. Yes, we need the freedom schools on Saturdays. Yes, I need to take my daughters to historic sites. Yes, I need to volunteer wherever I can to support whoever is trying to tell the stories, because they don't know how to teach it, or they don't know how far they can push the boundaries. And that lesson that I might contribute to might help that teacher in Escambia County, Florida, who doesn't know anything about Black history. But guess what? That's a classroom of kids that I helped just because I said, you know what, I can do this. And it's, slightly inconvenient, but it's important work. And I think right now, that's where we are. But I still hope for that, yes, African-American history is American history. Latino history is American history, etc.
Well, I second that. And I guess the only thing I want to add right now is, in addition to teaching the various wrongs that different groups like the Japanese Americans, in addition to African Americans and Latinx Americans have suffered, is to have a liberatory vision of the future. And I don't mean that we all have like sort of one whitewashed, George Washington is our father, and now, we're all one people and we have no cultural identity. No, we are an interesting place because we have different cultural backgrounds and identities and strengths and different art. And sometimes it blends together. And that's one of the things that's so much fun about teaching African-American culture. When you look at jazz, it's European, it's African, it's brass band, it's, so many things come into it. And it's not just one thing. And I teach environmental history too. And, if you look at science and ecology, you better believe that biodiversity is better than a monoculture. And a monoculture, pests have a field day. They know how to attack one and they're going to get them all right down the row. But if you have diversity, you have different strengths. You confuse those who are your enemies. If you're going to put it in, even a military context, we are all stronger. And I want to just continue to emphasize that, because I can become that depressing person who says all the things that went wrong. And I'm going to tell the truth about those things. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But I don't want you to give up your hope, young people, because you have a chance to bring all of these cultures into one. And you can argue, everyone gets to have a say. But at the end of the day, I hope that we care as much about someone who's not in our group as those who are, because if not, then we're not going to be a unified country. So I do a little preaching. And I want to hear from them too. And I said, think about your values when you come to this class. This class isn't just about you're going to memorize these facts. What are your values? How are you going to live those? And how are you going to treat other people in this class?
And for me, education. I mean, it stems. I second everything they're saying, but education is the key to this. Education, educating our students, them understanding, and quite frankly, when we get to a point when we don't have to have months for cultures, and we can all be together and understand, we celebrate our own histories from all cultures, and in a way that we're celebrating events that have happened throughout the year for everybody, and there's a sense of peace, and also where this book, or whether it's any book that has to do with Black history, is not a political item, where they're not using it as a political item. When we get to that point, that's where I think that we're going to see the most calmness, in a sense, and I think we're going to see the strength of our country as a whole. And I think to get to that point, though, we're going to have to continue with education, continuing to support each other, coming up with ways to make sure that we do continue to educate ourselves.
Thank you. And I agree with everything that's been said here by my other panelists, associates. I want to say that own who you are. Own who you are. And education is a large part of that. Educate yourself, but don't keep it to yourself. And go out, one, teach another. And we have to keep the Black resistance alive. And we do that starting with ourselves. We can't be silent any longer. If you see a wrong, correct it. And it can be done in a way that is kind. Have the difficult conversation with someone that doesn't look like you. And it may get uncomfortable, but that's how we grow. And we must learn to respect each other and respect our differences. But that start with ourselves.
And before we go to questions, can I say one more thing too? I want to say how impressed I am with Mr. Hernandez here being here. The fact that I have obviously a big part of my job is to talk to teachers, schools, and school districts, and the individuals who sat on the panel to create the Florida standards are typically not talked about in the most positive way because of the misunderstandings. And so for you to be here, man, is very impressive. It's inspiring. And I want to thank you, man. It's nice being up here with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Now the questions are open to the floor. Does anyone have a question for the panelists?
Thank you so much for all of you who've come and shared. I wish this was, I think it's being streamed, but I wish it was televised so more people can hear it, because I think each one of you represents something very special and significant and an answer to these different issues and problems that we're facing. One of the things that has really struck me is the language that is used to frame this conversation around education. That's one. And then also two, how the school system or public education has always been a battleground in terms of civil rights, except I think the public hasn't always seen it as such, but all throughout it's been there. So in terms of reframing the conversation and the language, I think that that is key for folks to have a more informed understanding what's going on. And so from my perspective, what I've been seeing is that there's been misinformation and disinformation about Black history. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and how the language can be changed, because the language that's being used now, I think it's divisive and it limits an understanding of what's going on. And then also too, in addition to the language, the idea of separating American history from Black history. So I was just visualizing in my head that if you really look through the different elements of American history and you extract the presence of African Americans, you really have only half the story. I like to have an understanding as to why it's separated in the first place when it should be taught with from a collective lens. And then third, in terms of how we all can help, if in addition to parents, how can other people help along these lines? I know that's a lot, but if any one of you can jump in any one of those areas, that would be great.
You guys want to go first? Go ahead, Henry. Okay, I just put one.
So one of the things that I heard about, and I'm going to answer one of them, and I'll let you guys answer some of the more in-school situations as far as the devices and divisiveness of the words that are used in the classroom. But something that, and that's why our textbook is called an inclusive account of American history. It's because it was the information that has been left out of the history books. And so unfortunately, we're not able to go in and rewrite the history books. And so we wanted to create a book that's going to fill in those gaps, exactly what you just talked about right now. And so that's where a resource like this, and I'm speaking from my perspective, supports creating a more cohesive experience for students in the classroom where they can see themselves in a textbook, they can learn about their history, or you can learn about your peers' history if you're a student and know where they came from, the challenges they have. I think of, and as well as the culture, I think of a close friend of mine. He's a Black gentleman who we were riding in the car together, and we have quinceañeras in my family. And we were actually, I was going to invite him to one. And he says, man, you don't realize how lucky you are. And this really put it in perspective for me. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you got to carry down your traditions and your celebrations. We didn't. Mine was taken away in the 1860s or maybe even other time periods. And so to hear that kind of gave me goosebumps like right now, but it really made me realize that there is a decisive, a divide between being able to understand somebody else's culture and be taught their culture. And so that's what something like this book does, is it helps teach them so that they understand. And to answer your question, how you can help from my perspective is awareness, is going into the schools, sitting in the school board meetings, talking to the teachers, to the decision makers, specifically the decision makers that are going to be, whether it's enacting policy for what's being taught in the classroom or the ones that are supporting what's being taught in the classroom, but bringing them, whether it's this resource or any other, whatever the class may be, to say, have you heard of this? Do you know about this? Because a lot of times teachers don't, and they don't realize, and maybe it's too late when they realize, because that time period of a buying period for the school has already passed. The adoption period has already passed, or maybe getting on the book list has already passed. And so it's very important just to generate awareness in that sense.
I'll just say very, very briefly about language, that in my class, I often will start off with, first of all, welcome to every kind of person from every background. And I'm specific about it. It would take too long. and then also including political, including religious, and all those things. I added the political because nobody really talked about that. I was like, I am not a conservative personally, but I welcome your perspective if you are. Because that's my hardest audience. But then I say, I want us all to be here for a brave space. There's no such thing as a completely safe space. The learning happens, like Ms. Perry said, when you are a little uncomfortable. That's the learning zone. I don't want you to be overwhelmed and, on the floor. But we're grown-ups. I mean, I do have young adults, but high school students, they're encountering pornography when they open this thing. They're encountering hate speech, all kinds of things. They can handle a civil conversation about race. That's, I just think we can, and we can be there to support them. Your training supports them. The community members support them. And the standards that you're trying to get, the right stuff in there and taking people out into the community, that's trust in your community members. Having some freedom to have that trust that truth will out. We all have this, and we can also find facts there in addition to all kinds of craziness. But our role as teachers, as educators in these various forums, is teaching research skills, and being there as a coach, mentor, referee, to make sure that compassion is the rule of the day, and that we can be brave together, and that we can even say the word love in a public setting that I love my students and I want them to learn in kind of that religious agape sense, but also as part of a nation, as part of a community where I care about you.
You asked a whole bunch of questions in that one little question. So I think I'm going to tackle what I wrote down as why is history fragmented? Why do we teach Black history and then Latino history? And my answer to that question is probably one that's going to leave all of us with non-closure, but I'm going to speak my truth and hopefully it'll give you some answer. Carter G. Woodson started ASALH in an effort to empower because no one else was teaching Black history. So it was that first kick into this is where we're going. My grandfather would tell me stories, and I'm sure this is very reminiscent for some people. I've heard this from students, would tell me stories about Puerto Rico and about, you know, the government irradiated Puerto Ricans in prisons, and they bombed Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, and, you know, just, okay, grandpa, whatever. Like, I grew up with the stories, and I remember I was probably about 38 years old and a book came out called War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson Dennis. And he did the work of a historian and found all of the documents that proved all of the stories that my grandfather told me. And I remember going to my grandfather going, "Oh, well, you got to read this book." He goes, "What's it about?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's about everything that they did to Puerto Ricans." He goes, "I don't need to read that book. I know the stories. Like, I don't have time for this. You know, like, why am I going to waste my time on that when I already know?" And, you know, I've experienced similar experiences with my African-American students where it's like, I had a student who was the descendant of Reuben Stacy. And I'm going to say his name because he deserves it. He is a man that was lynched in Broward County on July 19th, 1935. And Chelsea, like myself, heard the stories at home and it's just like, oh, it's just my grandma being crazy. And it wasn't until she was in my classroom and she was doing this cemetery project that she found this intersection of, this is my ancestor. And so suddenly it went from like a class project to, well, this is your story to tell. And I will support you as best that I can. And I will support your family as best that I can. But it's not necessarily my story to tell. And so, you know, back to the point of like, why do we have this fragmentation of our stories is because to some extent, no one cares more about our story than we do. And so to some extent, that's part of that answer. I'm going to be very bureaucratic with my next caveat to this answer, which is as an educator in a school district, when I first started teaching, one of the things on my evaluation was ritual compliance. So does the teacher occupy all spaces of the room? All right, so using this room as an example, am I staying at my desk or am I walking around and engaging with students? And sometimes it's like, I'll do a lap around the room, but not going in between the chairs. And so that would be like the ritual compliance. And so to some extent, I think in education, the answer to your question is it becomes a check mark. Did I teach Black history this month? Yes. And that's why my girls come home with Rosa Parks and MLK every year. And it's frustrating, you know, and that's where it's like, okay, I got to take you to Black history sites because you're only getting the same two people. And it's, you know, as one of the writers of the curriculum, I'm like, yay, across 5 years, they get exposed to a whole lot of different people because now it's a standard. But it's a check mark. You know, unfortunately, that's how the school system that I work in views a lot of this work. You know, and Monica spoke earlier, and it reminds me of the work of Paulo Freire who talked about like education not being just a piggy bank to drop knowledge on, but a way of empowering students. And for me, it's not just about like, here's information you need to know, but here's information you need to know that will activate you, empower you, so you can do the work that's necessary for the next step. Because if my students are my equals when they are older than me, then I failed as a teacher. They should be better than me. My children should be better than me. I firmly believe in the idea that I am here because my ancestors did the work to get me here. You know, so that's my answer, as ugly as it is, to the fragmented histories that we're dealing with. How can you help? My easiest response is be the squeaky wheel. In Florida, the governor has empowered the community. Anyone who is a member of the community who pays taxes in that community has a voice. My grandchildren go to this school. My great-grandchildren go to this school. My neighbor's son goes to this school. That to me is all a foothold into, I have a right to be here. This is my community too. Speak your truth. Always. Like, I love the book. I would love to get that into the hands of every African-American history teacher in Broward schools that I can get it into. I don't have the money to buy it, you know, but I would love to have everyone in the community come out and go, hey, you know what? We don't like this, and be the counter narrative to this one voice that's always the one that's squeaking right now, that's being answered by my governor, because I do live in the state of Florida. So be the squeaky wheel. My other thought is, please, please, please vote. We have very limited power in our country. At a most basic level, we are citizens. A lot of people have fought for us to have the right to vote. People have suffered for that thing. I remember a story that I heard from a woman who said, I was allowed to vote for the dog catcher, and I went and registered because I had a right to vote for the fucking dog catcher. And so she went and registered to vote for the dog catcher because that was her access to power. Use the power that we have. We have a powerful constitution. We have a powerful voice, and that's what we need to activate. I'm going to stop there.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I am enjoying this so very much. My question is this: can either of you cite examples of either colleagues, students, and or parents who have inherited racial or cultural biases, but upon learning about our history have become empathetic or respectful and even perhaps a changed person?
I'm one of those people. My life is so much bigger and better because of it. That's all I can say right now.
I just want to say that for the last almost 3 years, I have served as chair for the state of Florida Association of American Women, University Women. And what I chose to do was have the difficult conversations. And I started with the bias, microaggressions, etc. And so I said that to say, as time went on and the attendees felt they were in a safe space and they could open up, they would get very emotional at times, but I would get that testimony. And people can grow. That's the most important thing. Many that I had the conversations with, it started after George Floyd's death. One instance in particular, this husband and wife team from First Presbyterian Church in Vero Beach got in touch with me and was so touched and moved and said to me, we want to do something. We have to do something. We don't know what we want to do, but we want to do something. Excuse me. And they owned where they had been in consciousness. I'll say it like that. So they started Justice and Honor Task Force, and now it's a committee because we didn't just do it for 6 weeks or whatever, and I'm still a part of it. And it's a testament to the question that you asked. Consciousness is being changed. People are growing, but it has to start somewhere. Some people may decide that they don't want to talk about it in public, but they have had this reckoning, if you will, with themselves. So that's inspiring. And that's a motivator to me to keep doing the work with others, because it's not like, you're so involved, you do get tired, but I'm going to stick it out and stay fast with the organizations and groups that I'm a part of because of that very question, a change of consciousness.
And I'm going to add some just personal experiences with my family alone. When I first joined Black History 365, there were a lot of eyebrows raised. My mother is white. My father is Mexican American. I'm second generation. He was first generation. And on my white side, one thing I did not realize is the amount of implicit bias that was there and the amount of misunderstanding that was there until I joined this team and going through various trainings or working with teachers and realizing the impact that words have, the impact that even the notion of how you handle situations and the ripple effect that has on generations. And I'm one of those generations. I look at my grandparents, great-grandparents, and their mindset now. I realize the amount of implicit bias and the amount of really just bias in a sense of just the way they looked at certain people because they weren't the same, and how it was sometimes they didn't even do it on purpose. It was the way that they were raised. There's no excuse. But now sitting here working for a company that is making a change there and believing in it, and I truly live it out now. So now my family, while it's a challenge sometimes because some people are maybe a little older, like grandparents, but they're starting to see the value in something like education and educating on Black history or any type of cultural history. And so may not answer your question fully there, but it is something that personally I see it even with family or friends.
So your question triggered a whole bunch of thoughts for me, and I wrote them down. I don't have enough time to go through this, but I'll speak to you afterwards. But for the good of the group, I will share the bigger item, which is during the pandemic, I found out that my ancestors were enslavers. And I say we as a collective family, we owned 3 enslaved people. 2 of them were born in Puerto Rico, and 1 of them was brought from Africa. And I saw that on a slave census from Puerto Rico. And I learned this through a cousin who I had met during the pandemic because we connected through Facebook. And she goes, yeah, my great grandmother was raped by so-and-so. And I was like, what do you mean? And it contradicts the narrative that I was told as a child, which I always found, again, trust but verify. And the family stories, oh yeah, we had enslaved people. Actually, no, I'm not even going to sugarcoat how it was told to me. We had slaves, we treated them right. And I was just like, but it wasn't, like I said, a couple of years ago, I found out and I saw the names. And so, it's one of those where that's part of my story. And I've never shared that with anyone before, but I think you deserve that as a courtesy to your question. But I'll answer a little bit differently later. But That's the big one for me.
Any more questions? Comments? Okay.
The question is fair, but it also works both ways. Growing up, seeing a world in black and white, where white was the inflictor and black was the receptor, I was always a child that just imagined things both ways. I always had an imagination, and dare I say, at the Oslo conference, that if Europeans came into Africa and did not speak the language, I always imagined that there was, I'm going to make up a name so it's not to offend anyone, that there was a the first who was like, they are over there. And that they had some participation in that. And of course, historically, that has been verified. And unfortunately, we don't speak as much about those who did look like us, who benefited from these trades. But conversely, I always realized and imagined that everyone who looked like me was accompanied by others, those who look like you, who are in the struggle and the fight for our freedom. And I had to admit that I was an adult. As an adult, as I was teaching my child, that I realized that while learning about Harriet Tubman, that I missed Thomas Garrison and Lloyd Garrett and the white abolitionists who were a part of that, so that I could now never look at a race of people and look at them collectively as the inflictors, because I don't know from which lineage. Who am I looking at? Am I looking at a descendant of John Brown, or am I looking at a descendant of a slave master and owner? So they say it's a poor rule if it doesn't work both ways. So I have had to look at that within myself and demand that of those in my family who look at the abject racism as an excuse to collectively hate all white, in as much as I don't want that to reflect upon those who decide that they're going to hate all Black people just because of how they look as well. So.
Thank you for my source. I think she had her hand up. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the panels, all four of you, and especially Mr. Roberto. I had a great grandmother to live down in Pompano Beach, and I used to go down there every summer on Hammersfield Road. Okay, and that was, I think, one of the Blight main arteries in Pompano Beach, and I was just wondering, my grandmother, my great grandmother rather, had some Native American, and looked like we forget about that part of our heritage as Blights. We are, and then I also reflect back on my mom's side of the family. We had some relatives. We had a family reunion up in South Carolina, and she brought our family from Africa. She brought us back generations. And when we first landed on the little island out from South Carolina, and the Geechees. So, and my kids always used to go, "Mom, you don't pronounce your words right all the time." And I say, well, when we went to our family reunion, I said, now you understand I'm part Geechee. But I enjoyed you all. And when I was in high school, and that's been 50 years ago, I had Black history. They did teach it back then. Mr. Sullivan was my teacher back then. And we had just integrated, and I went to Vero Beach High School, and we had Black history. And I can reflect now back on some of the things that he taught me, and I'm seeing it come full circle. Because back then, segregation was still, we had just started integrating, but I lived through a period of segregation. And I was telling my kids about it. They said, "Mom, y'all did?" Yes. We couldn't go certain stores. We had to go in the back door. Certain stores we went in, we couldn't sit at the counter. I went through that in my lifetime. But I just thank you all for everything.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
I just sat there listening to some of these heart-wrenching and moving stories. I want to compliment the panel. You guys were fantastic. Just like to relate something that happened to me in my life, which kind of indirectly or obliquely relates to the last question. My family moved us to Indiana in 1952, so coming from Alabama and then Chicago, I still have to call myself a Hoosier now. Some may know what that is. When I began Indiana University School of Dentistry in 1961, I was the only African American in my class, a class of about 112 students. I will never forget the first class I went to. There was a Japanese, Hawaiian instructor talking about partial denture, and he was superb. As we were leaving the class, he said, "Just a minute, boys and girls," that's what he called us, and that was okay. He was much older than we were. He said, "I'd just like to make an announcement. All of you kids, except you colored kids and you Jewish kids, are welcome to join my dental fraternity, the Delts." And I turned to the young fella next to me. His name was Terniscam Taylor, so we sat out alphabetically initially. I said, "Mike, did he just say what I thought he said?" And he said, "Yeah, Ray, don't worry about it. I will become a Delt, and any advantages that fraternity has, I'll make sure you have the same advantages. All the old tests. Anybody who knows about old tests, they help you. You don't get the answers, but you get the idea." He said, "If you need to cast something, crown or something afterwards, I'll take." Mike and I became best friends. He was the only person in that class that related to me as another human being. At our 50th class anniversary, I told that story to Mike and several others. You do remember that, don't